So my question today is going to be a callback to yesterday's show. So on yesterday's show, I talked about politics as the art of compromise and what that really means. And I said what that doesn't mean is that, hey, here's one candidate that's not going to do anything for you and they don't represent you at all. Here's this other candidate who is going to make your life miserable. Pick one or everything's your fault. That's not politics as the art of compromise. The art of compromise in politics means, and the example I gave was in regards to living wages. I support the fight for 15. I think we need to implement that right away. Joe Candidate says, I support the fight for 15 too, but I think there ought to be a clause in there that small businesses have a longer time to adopt to it, that if they're a business of a certain size, they get more of a grace period if they're smaller. I disagree with that, but I can go along with that. I could compromise on that if I needed to. That was the example I gave. Somebody in the chat said, well, Ron, why are you against that? It was at the end of the show, and the example was in reference to something else, so I didn't have time to get into that, but I thought that would make a fun question for today. So the topic for today that we're going to talk about before we get into the articles and the news for today is living wages. And getting back to what I said yesterday, I support the fight for 15. I think that needs to be implemented nationwide. And that's a start at getting our living wages where they need to be. Now, some people, even on the left, say that they're for the fight for 15, but they think that small businesses need to have a longer grace period to get to $15 an hour. I understand that perspective, but I am against it. And I want to know if you guys are for it or against it and why. Here's why I'm against it. There's a couple reasons. First of all, from just a structural standpoint, why, whenever something like a fight for 15 is implemented or a similar policy, there's always a period of time before it's enforced. There's always a grace period, if you will. So why does a small business, how would a longer one benefit a small business? You know, like how would a longer one benefit a small business? The cost of labor is something that goes into your business cost. Why would a longer grace period, other than the one allotted, be necessary? So that's one factor right there. The other thing is, I think that if you can't afford to hire someone and pay them a living wage, you're not ready for that employee. And I know that's kind of being like, maybe that's tough love a little bit, but I really feel that way. The cost of labor is a cost of your business. If you have a pizza shop, you have certain costs. The cost of cheese, the cost of tomatoes, the cost of toppings. And you're going to try to get quality products, presumably, if you want your pizza place to do well. When you're buying your product, you don't get to be, oh, I'm a small business and I'm just starting out. Do I get to pay less for this? No, you don't. It costs the same for you as it does for everybody else. Same with labor. Hey, I'm new and I'm starting out. Can I pay less for your labor? Like, no, you're getting the same labor as everybody else, and you should pay a living wage. Now, there are other ways to get your labor needs met if you have budgetary constraints to start out. There's freelance. There's contracting. There's you can cut people into the company and assume the same risk. Say you have a partner. You guys split up the labor, and you both go in on the company as an investment. So this idea that a small business couldn't have any help unless, if they can't afford $15 an hour right away, well, that's simply not true based on our labor laws here in the United States. They couldn't have an actual employee if they can't afford to pay that wage. And that's why I feel the way I do. So, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on this? All right, so Andrew says, I support a quantitative easing period for small businesses and nonprofits. Okay. They must prove financial instability without it. So I don't know if I agree with that. I think if they say, look, I have financial instability, if I pay someone $15 an hour as an employee, then it's like, okay, well, then you can't afford to be in business right now. Yeah, again, getting back to the pizza shop example. Hey, guys, there's no cheese on my pizza because it turns out if I bought cheese, I can't afford to stay in business. So here's some bread and sauce with some pepperoni. You cool with this? No, I'm not. I want actual pizza, and I'm sorry that you can't provide this, but I guess you can't be in business right now. So yeah, I don't think they should have a longer grace period than everyone else. And I am 110% for small businesses. I've been around small businesses my whole life, still am. I've pretty much only worked for small businesses for the most part whenever I've had a day job. But more importantly, I'm for living wages. Let's see. What else are you guys saying? I work for a small town newspaper, and we could never afford $15 for everyone or down the road. I still support the fight for 15, though. Tough one to answer. How do you know that for sure, Jordan? I mean, $15 an hour, if living wages, if minimum wage kept up with inflation, it would actually be higher than 15. It would be higher. It would be around $20 an hour. And maybe if people were getting living wages, they would buy more newspapers. Also, I don't know. I'd be curious to know all the details because, and I understand newspapers are not really sustainable ventures right now. I understand that's an issue, but I think anyone working for that paper deserves a living wage. Joseph, a little confused with the argument for the grace period. How does giving a small business a longer transition period help them to the point where they can pay a living wage to their employees? That's what I don't understand either. People don't realize that if we had $15 an hour, we could pay for more expensive pizza. It's not like we all get priced out. $15 an hour isn't even enough to have a quality of life in most, if not all places, Mike says. Garden Gnome, I think that while 15 is needed, one of the downsides is businesses will try to skirt employment laws by making all employees independent contractors, etc., when possible. I think you will see some of that. I don't think you'll see that on a mass level. I think that, yeah, some people are going to do that for the long term and see if they can get away with it. That is true. But I worked for a non-kill humane society that could barely afford 5 employees at $9 an hour and 1 director at $30K a year. Lost money on every pet sale and relied on donors to make the difference. Then they would have to have contractors. And they probably could because you're going to get a lot of people that believe in the cause and want to support it and make sure it stays afloat. You know, just because your company is a good cause doesn't mean you can just pay people not enough money to survive. And again, and those employees would have the option to become contractors. Garden Gnome, Ron, we are already seeing the independent contractor phenomenon now. We've been seeing it for a long time. As somebody that works in show business and has worked as a freelance writer, we've been seeing it for a long, long time. And whether we have living wages or not, it's not going away. If we actually had living wages, it would hit the people at the top the hardest. You guys are... I think that when you're really focusing on some of the small businesses that can't afford it for good reason, you're focusing on the outliers. And I understand it's still a factor. However, overall, the fight for 15 would hit the big companies hardest, and they can afford it. I mean, let's go back to Andrew's Humane Society example. Maybe if people got paid living wages and they were working part-time at a place that they don't really care about, maybe they would have more time to volunteer at a humane society, and they could help out that way. If people had enough money in their pockets to survive. They would have more time to give more. Maybe if someone's getting paid a living wage, maybe if somebody that works at Target full-time and busts their ass, maybe if they're getting paid a living wage, they could afford to make a donation to the Humane Society once a year that they weren't able to afford otherwise. And that helps the Humane Society stay afloat. Miss Tree points out more people would also buy and rescue and adopt dogs. So yeah, I don't, and while I certainly understand the factor of small businesses, I don't think a longer grace period will make a difference. Garden Gnome, I'm a radical and believe in things like price controls, which would help balance the negative results of 15, the quote negative results. Federal job guarantee would also help alleviate downsides. I do think price controls, if implemented in the right way, could be a good thing. One thing I lean even more towards are price ceilings on salaries. I do, and I know that's a real radical idea when you say that in the United States, but I'm all for it. I think we got to have salary caps. I think there's no reason why there should be a Jeff Bezos in the world. There's just no reason why somebody should have that amount of wealth. There's no reason for it. That guy, we could have a salary cap on something like that, and someone like a Jeff Bezos would still have more money than they could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. Their family would never have to worry, ever. There could still be rich people, is what I'm saying. But, man, how much do you frickin' need? Ron, what's your opinion on a 28-hour work week? I'm all for it. I'm all for it. We overpad our work culture here in the United States, and I think we should have a 28-hour work week when possible. Now, not in every case is that possible. I mean, certainly you might not be able to do that with a doctor or nurses, or you might not be able to do that if you are a small business owner. But I think when you work for a big company and you're not seeing any of the results of your production really, and you're just getting paid a wage and you're arguably underpaid, and even at $15 an hour, you'll still be arguably underpaid. I'm all about having a better work-life culture in this country. Zillion Bidney, Target will never pay their employees a living wage ever. They will if it's a federal law. I'm worried about things after the wage. This is Chris. I'm worried about firings after the wage increase as well as rent hikes. This is why we need one bill of rent control and federal jobs guarantee plus living wage. I agree with that. However, I agree with most of that. I don't agree about the firings. I think they're just trying to scare us. I really do, in a lot of ways. Now, automation is coming, and automation is going to come whether we have living wages or not. It's coming. Whether we have living wages or not, it's going to come. We have to adapt to it. Meaning we should prepare for society with less jobs. Meaning UBIs and adapting to the technology to create new jobs. Garden Gnome says, salary caps aren't needed so much when you apply a decent tax rate. I still think we should have them. but I understand your point. That is true. Watson points out, a tired populace is very pliable. Very true. When you're living to work, it's really hard to stand up for any change. Russian Bot says, worker co-ops are a better work-life culture. I agree with you, Russian Bot. I think we should definitely have worker co-ops. I like worker co-ops. My goal is to create a worker co-op out of GetYourNewsOnWithRon right now. I cannot afford that yet, but when I can, I'm going to make it worker co-op.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news